Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another one of Mr. Lang's vlogs. Today we're talking about World War II. Again, one of the biggest events that have ever happened in our world's history. Very important stuff here, so let's get right to it. So first, we're going to talk about the road to the war, again, prior to war breaking out. Now, we've gone over some of these things before. Again, this is more of a little bit of a recap, if you will. So first, again, there was a issue going on in something called the Sudetenland. Now, this land is actually given to Czechoslovakia after the Treaty of Versailles. There are a lot of ethnic Germans living there, and because of that, Hitler is going to want to take it back. Again, he sees that as a problem, as he wants to unite all Germanic people together. And of course, these Germans are now part of a different country. So what's going to happen is, of course, he's going to demand that Sudetenland get put back into Germany's hands. And of course, Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of Britain at the time, does go ahead and give him that. In fact, he appeases him. Again, when you have someone appeasing you, or it's appeasement, that's giving in to demands in order to attempt to avoid a larger conflict here. And that's what Neville Chamberlain was doing. He figured if he gave Hitler the Sudetenland, then he wouldn't ask for anything more. In fact, Hitler promised that, of course, he wouldn't take any more land after he got the Sudetenland. So at the Munich Conference in 1938, it is settled that Hitler will gain the Sudetenland, but he will not gain any more. In fact, Neville Chamberlain very famously said that we have peace in our time, and that Hitler is a man we could do business with. Now, obviously, we know hindsight's 2020, but what we kind of see now is, almost like a false sense of security going on here in the world because of this. In the meantime, Hitler's still building his army secretly against the Treaty of Versailles, and he has plans to take even more land. Now, Czechoslovakia, all of it will become part of the Third Reich, again, part of Germany in 1939, and this is bad news. Again, something that kind of shocks everybody is when two incredible evil men made a pact together. They made an agreement. Both Hitler and Stalin make what they call the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact in August 1939. Now, this doesn't mean that these guys are best friends by any means, but what it does mean is that Stalin, from the Soviet Union, and Hitler, from Germany, would agree not to attack one another. And this is important because, of course, when you think about the plan of what Hitler had basically brewing, it really helps out both Stalin and Hitler, in that Hitler now doesn't have to split his army like the Germans had to in World War I and invade Russia and France at the same time. And of course, Stalin, this guy gave him more time to build up an army. Again, do you think this is going to last? Exactly. So, France in the meantime has been building something called the Maginot Line. Now, this is really France's false sense of security, where they have these almost machine gun nests, these defenses, all along the border between Germany and France. And really, we see that it was very ineffective. It's going to be very ineffective. It's, these machine gun nests that are pointed, again, right around here between France and Germany, where those red dots are on the actual screen. And of course, we're going to see that this was very ineffective, especially where the Germans are going to cut through Belgium like they did during World War I. So again, we're going to see that that's generally not going to help out the French. And of course, we are going to see that they just kind of go around the Maginot Line. So the war begins when Poland's attack, September 1st, 1939. Germany's invasion of Poland sparks World War II. This is literally the beginning. This is the beginning date of World War II is right here. Now, Hitler's army actually utilizes something called Blitzkrieg. Now, Blitzkrieg warfare literally means lightning warfare. And this is the first time we really see this in action. other than previously in Guernica in Spain, and that's a whole different story. Now, this, for example, is the way it works is first the tanks and planes and artillery overwhelm the enemy, and then the infantry clean up the rest. There's just constant bombing non-stop. It's fast, swift, and fortunately, it's effective. What's going to be interesting is, of course, we have Germany's going to invade Poland on one side, Stalin and the Soviet Union is going to invade Poland on the other side. Again, and they're going to split Poland essentially in half. Now, these are the German troops marching into Warsaw. Again, a sight that nobody wanted to see for sure. Now, in 1940, they are going to form the Rome-Berlin-Tokyo axis, or the Tripartite Pact, between these three nations of Italy, Japan, and Germany. And we're going to see that this is, of course, going to create the Axis powers in this war. So there are different theaters in this war. In fact, the theaters are really relative to where the fighting was. Now, the fighting was literally all around the world. It's a world war. So we are going to see that the European and North African theaters are going to be our first focus, yet we're going to be focusing on other theaters as well. Probably very famously here is during the European theater is how fast and how overwhelmed the French are when Hitler finally turns and attacks France. When he does, we see him just absolutely take it over so fast. And again, it's because the French people weren't prepared. Now, the British troops were there helping out. However, what we're going to see is they're no match for this new type of warfare. And so in around the end of May, early June, there's actually the biggest evacuation really of all time, still to this day, at Dunkirk, where literally fishermen, anybody with a boat, is going to cross the channel, pick up anybody they can from France, and escort them back over to Great Britain. Again, soldiers, especially soldiers, so they can fight another day. It is a great effort to see, for sure. However, it is very interesting to see that, they needed to get out of there, or else they were just, this pocket, as you can see in the picture here, was going to be squished, and that would have been no good. Now, this is the largest scale evacuation, again, in history. It's still up to this point. It is an evacuation of British and French troops from France to Great Britain to fight another day. They are going to go across the English Channel. They're going to at least survive, although in the end, this is going to ultimately lead to France being completely taken over by the Germans. They do surrender in June of 1940, and what we see is that France is going to be split into two different parts, occupied France and something called Vichy France, which essentially is a phantom government, really, that's set up where we're going to have, essentially Germany still ruling over France, just it's called Vichy France. Again, you'll see that Henry Pétain, he's going to be the person in charge of Vichy France. Again, he's going to literally be in Hitler's pocket. So, again, very, very horrible stuff, especially because, again, the Jewish people of France are going to be rounded up as well during this, as we're going to get into the horrible effects of the Holocaust as well. So, during this time, the French are fighting back. In fact, the Free French and the Maquis are actually going to be huge in fighting back the actual Germans. They're going to be the biggest thorn on their side. The French resistance is incredible, as these guys literally are, and girls, are going to be some of the most incredible, really freedom fighters, because they're fighting for their home. They want their home back. What's incredible is, of course, how they do it. They have so many of these little spy gadgets just to go ahead and, be a thorn in the German side, including ripping up, railroad tracks, destroying supply dumps, things like that. It's pretty incredible to see that the French really were still fighting. And they're going to be really led by General Charles de Gaulle, who's going to actually eventually lead during the war as well at the end. But the problem here is you're already noticing something. First, I have not mentioned the word United States, because the United States is on their side of the pond. We're over here. We're saying, hey, you guys over there, you have a problem? Take care of that problem. Okay. We're going to stay over here and be isolated. Britain is all alone now at this point. They are all alone fighting the Germans, the Japanese, and the Italians. It's a lot. And it's pretty interesting because Obviously, with France taking over, we know what Hitler's next move is. And it's no surprise, as of course he starts to look towards the country of Great Britain. And that is where he's going to go attack next. Now, Britain stood alone against the Axis powers from the summer of 1940 until December of 1941 for a year and a half, until we entered the war, because of Pearl Harbor, as you may know, which we'll be talking about soon. But yeah, the British Bulldog there, Winston Churchill, is going to be holding the line as the only allies that are still in this war, still in this fight. And of course, unfortunately, we're going to see that next move was 100% right. Now, the US wasn't in the war yet, but we're going to be helping out the British in something called the Lend-Lease Act. What happens here is Britain's flat broke. They're fighting a war. They technically were still recovering with their economies from World War I. So the US lends Britain arms and other supplies to the Allies. Because we lent them this, we were never going to get it back. We didn't expect to get this stuff back. We aren't going to just lend Great Britain stuff, but we are going to lend other nations, other allied powers as well. But we're going to lend Britain a lot of it. And Britain's going to get the most for sure. And remember, during this time, we're neutral. We're completely neutral. Yet the other countries, again, the Axis powers, knows we're doing this. So again, it's only a matter of time before we're going to get involved in this mess. So the inevitable happened. Hitler attacks Great Britain. And when he does, it's during what they call it's the Blitz. Although Hitler's never is going to make a foothold, never going to go ahead and actually land in Britain, the dogfighting that occurs above is incredible. Between, again, the Stukas, which are the airplanes of the Germans, and the Spitfires, which are the airplanes of the British. The Royal Air Force, the RAF, are going to help really protect and drive Hitler from Great Britain. As if they did not do the amazing job they did, Great Britain could have been invaded. Now, the people of Great Britain also are incredible in that they do whatever they can, as there's going to be constant fires going on in big cities like London that were getting bombed literally non-stop. Again, they're going to be putting them out. They're going to be putting their best effort forth. It's incredible to see. It is, devastating what happens to, the beautiful cities of Great Britain. Meanwhile, again, a lot of the civilians would actually go down to the tube, again, down into the subway in London, as those were considered air raid shelters during the Blitz. Again, if you could only imagine the fear and everything from that. And again, it is these men right here, the RAF, the Royal Air Force, that truly does essentially help keep Britain in this war and beat back the evil that is Hitler and the Germans. And again, never in the course of human events was so much owed to so few, as Winston Churchill said, as this was Britain's finest hour. Again, Winston Churchill is the Prime Minister now. Again, Neville Chamberlain is not going to be Prime Minister. He is at the beginning of the war. But again, when Winston Churchill comes in, he's going to be a huge figure in this war. Now, Winston Churchill was very much vocal against Hitler prior to the war. It almost seemed like nobody was listening to him, really. But here we are, and here he is leading in a most very pivotal time in Britain history, and really in world history to begin with. Again, it's quite incredible how he does essentially lead these men into victory. Never in the course of human events, right? Now, the Battle of Britain, what comes out of it is more so than just victories. What comes out of it are two incredible inventions. One is radar. Radar is the secret weapon the British used that the Germans didn't have. In fact, the Germans didn't even know the British had. Again, with radar, they could see when the Germans were going to attack. And that's huge. That's very big information when it is, of course, the Germans coming in trying to ambush the British. We're also going to have sonar. Sonar is another big invention here, where the British are going to use this to spot German U-boats. Again,
the Underseeboots, the actual submarines, and when they do, they're going to attack. So again, they can defend the coast, as again, Great Britain is, well, really the United Kingdom, it's an island. So at the end of the day, again, they could attack from sea, land, or air. And here they have air and sea covered. And again, you can help beat them back if they never land. So there you go. Now during this time, we also have the Atlantic Charter. This is signed between Roosevelt and Churchill. Really, they signed this Treaty of Friendship in August of 1941. Again, let me reiterate, they're still not in the war. Okay, the U.S. is still not in the war at this point. Yet it solidifies an alliance between Britain and the U.S. Essentially, a joint pledge to not pursue territorial expansion or any other territorial gains during this time. It calls for a League of Nations type organization as well. Something that we're going to see is going to carry over into the United Nations after this war. Now, during this whole endeavor in 1941, in the summer of 1941, we have Operation Barbarossa launched, where Hitler invades Russia. Again, invades the USSR. Not a good idea. When he invades in June, again, the Russians act very similar to how they did when Napoleon invaded their land. They're going to let Hitler in. Hitler's going to come into the USSR. And by December of 1941, you're going to see that dotted line. That's where the front line was. But notice something. I said December 1941. This started in June. That's right. They were still in their summer fatigues. They didn't have the winter gear. And now it's winter in, well, Russia. Winter in Russia is never a good thing if you're not used to it. So again, that is going to be one of the biggest things that the USSR, the Soviet Union, does. They essentially lead Hitler into their land, essentially knowing that this is going to be some fierce fighting going forward. And of course, we are going to see when they do invade, when Operation Barbarossa does go off, when Hitler invades and stabs Stalin back in the back, which told you wouldn't last long. Again, you're going to have 3 million German soldiers, 3,400 tanks that are going to be rolling across. They thought this would be an easy target, especially because they had already finished up taking over France. So remember, they didn't have to split their army like in World War I. Again, they already took over France. Now they can go over, and they tried to take Britain. Didn't happen. So now they're going over to Russia, to the USSR. So what ends up happening in December of 1941 is, of course, the U.S. is now part of this war because of Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor occurs where Japanese go ahead, they invade Pearl Harbor, which is a naval base in Oahu, which is one of the islands of Hawaii. When they're invaded, they are going to take out a lot of our naval fleet, because our naval fleet is stationed there. That's why it was targeted. And what's going to happen at 8 a.m. that morning is just that, is they're going to be ambushed on December 7th, 1941. It is Admiral Yamamoto that led the attack for the Japanese. And again, this is actually a picture of Pearl Harbor from the cockpit of a Japanese pilot. Again, you can see the smoke and devastation already, but you can also see all the ships. That was our target. Again, wipe out our Navy, and we would have a hard time going ahead and responding to this. It was a very strategic move and a very smart one, unfortunately, other than, of course, they awoke the sleeping giant, the U.S. So, again, Pearl Harbor, as FDR, says on the radio, it's a date which will live in infamy, as it truly is a date that's still remembered today. Again, because of this, Roosevelt signs a declaration of war, declare war on Japan. Later, Germany declares a war on us, and now the U.S. is a part of this war. Things aren't looking great, though. Again, we have one of the main ships, the USS Arizona, is sunk at Pearl Harbor. It's actually got a museum that's there today, right above it, which I'll show you in the next picture. So that in that Pearl Harbor Memorial, it's it's sad what happened, as there were civilians on the base that day as well, and we lost soldiers, civilians, and it was just a matter of time before we got into the war. And this was it. This was the reason too. Now, if you've ever seen Pearl Harbor, the movie, there's actually Dory Miller is played by Cuba Gooding Jr. That is accurate in the movie. The love story isn't. The love story is horrible, but nevertheless, Dory Miller is in the movie, and he's portrayed by Cuba Gooding Jr. as a cook who went ahead and actually shot down Zeros, which are the Japanese planes. So the U.S. mobilizes for war. Again, we had to at this point. After all of this, we passed the Selective Service Training and Service Act, where, essentially is the draft. However, there were many men that signed up willingly, volunteered for this war to fight. There were selling of war bonds. Again, war bonds are going to be those, essentially just like, in World War I, these Liberty bonds that are going to go ahead. You go pay a little bit of money, you get a bond, you hold on to that bond for, say, 20 years, and it's going to be worth more money when you cash it in. And they're also going to start hiring women to take over traditionally male jobs. This is where we see the incredible Rosie the Riveter as an example of, and many other women who step up and perform incredible tasks. They're going to be welders. They're going to fill those jobs. When the men are out to fight, the women are going to keep everything going back home. And that is an incredible task. And they do a magnificent job. These women are just incredible. I couldn't say more about them. Again, if it wasn't for the women literally stepping up, and again, unfortunately, they're a group that have been stepped on throughout history in the U.S. They are stepping up to the plate to serve in some of the most important jobs during this war. And now the Allies are these guys, the big three. You have Winston Churchill of Great Britain, Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the U.S., and you have Joseph Stalin from the USSR, from the Soviet Union. It's these three that are going to help beat back the evil that is Hitler and his war machine. They're going to beat back Hitler, Mussolini in Italy, and the Emperor and Hirohito and Tojo in Japan. What we're going to see here is that this isn't going to be an easy task. There's a large war still looming in front of us. And what happens next will be in our next one. Okay? Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you guys back in the classroom.